and joining via WebEx, and for those hardcore people who braved the snow to go in person, appreciate that. Committee, we are going to have a hearing, but we will not be working any bills until we are back in the committee room in person. So with that, we will open the hearing on Senate Bill 99 with an overview from our reviser. And is that going to be David?
Yes,
David
Madam Chair.
Weeks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senate Bill 99 requires the head of each state agency and the director of the budget to certify on or before June 30th, 2025 to the Secretary of Administration the number of vacant positions in each state agency paid from appropriations from the State General Fund that have been vacant for 180 days, calendar days or more as of June 30, 2025. Upon receipt of that certification, the Secretary of Administration is to abolish those vacant positions on July 1st of 2025. And then those vacant positions, those abolished positions would be deleted from any budget documents and reports prepared by the Director of the Budget, the Governor, or the Legislative Research Department for submission to the Legislature for budget preparation purposes. Senate Bill 99 also provides that for fiscal year 2026, the amount in each account of the State General Fund budgeted for the payment of salaries and wages, including fringe benefits for any of those abolished positions, would be lapsed from each account. The bill defines state agency as any state agency that is named in an appropriation act of the 2025 regular session of the legislature. And with this certification having to take place by June 30, 2025, the bill does become effective upon publication in the register. And I can stand for any questions, Mr. Chair, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much. Committee, what questions do we have for the reviser? Okay, seeing none. Thank you very much. We will move on to proponent testimony. And we have Tanner Temple from Americans for Prosperity. Tanner, are you with us? Okay, I'm not seeing Tanner. If he's able to join, we will come back to him. He is the only, do we have any other proponents? Okay, seeing none, committee, we do have written only proponent testimony from Vance Ginn, Senior Fellow from Kansas Policy Institute. So we will now turn to opponent testimony, and we have Heather Cessna. Is Heather with us? Okay, I'm not seeing Heather. Do we have any other opponent testimony? This is going to be the shortest hearing ever, I'm afraid, committee. Do we have any other opponent testimony? Okay, seeing none.
Senator?
Committee, we do, yes.
This is Connie. For some reason, they went to Senate Commerce. He's in changing them right now and sending them out again for government efficiency.
Okay, committee, we will stand at ease for a moment until our conferees are able to join us. So I appreciate your patience if you'll just stand by for a moment. Thank you, Connie.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Senator Thompson.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have access to the S drive. I'm looking for the written testimony on the website, and the date doesn't come up. I didn't know if Connie was going to upload that or have it available or not. Just checking. Thank you,
Okay,
Madam.
you bet. Connie,
Yes,
do we have an update on the availability of testimony?
I'm uploading it right now.
Madam Chair, if you didn't notice, Tanner Temple just joined the meeting. This is Lance, the broadcasting team member in the room, by the way.
Okay, thank you so much, Lance. Committee, we will now turn to Tanner Temple with proponent testimony. Tanner, can you hear us?
I sure can. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you for joining us.
You bet. I apologize for some of the technical difficulties there, but I'm here. So, Madam Chair and members of the committee, again, my name is Tanner Temple. I'm with Americans for Prosperity. I'm here today in support of Senate Bill 99, the act concerning the state budget and full-time positions within state agencies. This legislation is vital for improving our state government's efficiency and fiscal responsibility. First, this act ensures our budget reflects actual staffing needs by abolishing positions vacant for over 180 days. This avoids unnecessary fund allocation to unutilized positions and promoting transparent and accountable budgeting. So, second, the act reallocates funds efficiently by lapsing amounts allocated for the salaries of these abolished positions. This optimizes the use of taxpayer dollars, reducing waste and enhancing state service delivery. Lastly, this legislation fosters a culture of continuous assessment and optimization within state agencies. It encourages proactive human resource management and maintaining a dynamic and responsive state workforce. In conclusion, this act is a crucial step towards a more efficient, accountable, and fiscally responsible state government. I urge the committee to support this legislation, and I will answer questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you so much. Committee questions for Mr. Temple. Seeing none. Thank you so much for joining us and for being patient as we work through the online availability. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, do we have our proponent yet? Do we have Heather?
I'm here, Chairwoman. Thank you very much for having me.
Welcome to committee.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to talk. Looks like I'm having issues with my camera, but I will keep going. We are here in opposition to Senate Bill 99 because we have some concerns with the fact that due to the attorney shortages across the state of Kansas, that the hiring process for attorneys in particular is a very competitive and elongated process that requires us to frequently hire attorneys in the beginning of their third year of law school. And as a result of that, we've had very great success in doing that. We have a lot of attorneys over the last couple of years that we have been able to hire in their third year of law school, basically hold their positions while we wait for them to graduate in May, and then be able to actually have them start after they take the bar exam, or if they have their temporary license, maybe a little bit earlier than getting their bar results in the following summer. But as a result of that, the terminology in Senate Bill 99 about the 180-day vacancy is concerning to us because we think we're going to have a lot of positions that, for attorney positions in particular, we end up having to hold longer than that because of that competitive hiring process. And now those are positions that are technically vacant, but they have been offered, they've been accepted, they are committed positions. And so we would, if the committee was going to move forward with this bill, we would definitely like to see some kind of conversation about whether or not there can be some kind of amendments to the language of this bill in order to account for those positions that are committed but not yet started, as opposed to just true vacancies where someone's not actually in those positions. But I'm happy to stand for questions.
So much. We do have one more opponent, so if you're able to stay on until after that testimony, it would be appreciated.
Absolutely.
Committee, next we have Charleston Dalton, Chief of Staff for the AG Office. Welcome to committee. Is Charleston with us?
Madam Chair, I do not see him online in WebEx.
Okay, we will see if we can get him after we have we will have questions for our opponent, Heather. Committee, what questions do we have for Heather? Senator Thompson, are you raising your hand?
Yes, I am.
Senator Thompson.
Navigating the clunky WebEx. Sorry about that. Yeah, Heather, I understand your situation, but I'm just trying to seek we're going to probably hear a lot of different reasons why we can't do this. But what would you propose that would work better in your case? It would still allow us to eliminate positions that go unfilled.
Thank you very much, Senator, for that question. Honestly, in our agency in particular, because we are the public defense agency, I mean, obviously we think we need all of the positions that we have because we're already short about 667 positions from where we think we need to be to meet our current caseloads. As far as the larger question that you have about what we can do, I think that what we want to avoid is for those agencies and like ours that are in the process of filling those positions and have like made those commitments to those to those prospective employees that we don't want to have to rescind, obviously, because of the particular timeline in this bill. I think if you did have some kind of a modification that allows for the committed as opposed to a true, just a plain vacancy language, and I will fully admit, this is me thinking like a lawyer here, because if you have the language that's in the bill right now that says vacancy, I think that tends to be interpreted very literally. But if you make some kind of a provision for the possibility that you do have a position that's been committed, but somebody just hasn't started it yet, so that you're not having to rescind offers that we've already made and then ruin our recruiting efforts at law schools for future hiring processes, I think that would at least help our agency in particular. And the reason why I say that is because on our end, the really competitive, difficult part of hiring is the attorney positions. Like for our non-attorney positions, it's the turnover. I mean, we do have turnover occasionally, and it does take us time to replace those individuals if they do turnover, but it's nothing as elongated as what we're looking at for attorneys, because there's just such an attorney shortage in Kansas. And so that's the positions that I think we're the most concerned about that could be negatively affected by that bill, especially when we already have those those positions committed, but those individuals just can't quite start yet. So I think if you did have some kind of a language that allowed for that, for people who are truly in process and are not just hanging on to these positions, to keep them vacant for other cost savings for extended periods of time, I think that would hopefully, at least for our purposes, meet that need. Does that answer your question, Senator?
Yes, it does. Follow-up question, though, if I could, Madam Chair.
Absolutely.
Okay. So when they sign these commitment papers, how long in advance is that typically? How long is the process, or does it vary?
So our process, like I said, most of what we're talking about is we participate in the on-campus interview process at a lot of law schools, which usually starts somewhere in the beginning of August to like October of the third year of their law school career. So that's the last year of law school. So we're talking about making commitments oftentimes in that fall timeframe, and then waiting for them to graduate the next May, and then they take the bar exam usually in July, because the bar is only offered in February and July. So if they graduate in May, they have to wait till July to take the bar exam. And if you apply for the bar exam and you are waiting your results, you can get an early temporary license to practice. So some of those individuals may start like in July or August after they take the bar exam. Some of them end up waiting until September to make sure they pass and get their results back before they actually start if they don't have their temporary license to practice. So you're talking about a 9, 10 month, sometimes, a full 12 months, depending on how early we've offered that position. And like I said, we've done pretty well with that. I mean, we have a very high percentage rate of those individuals that we're offering that to in their third year law school. They're successfully graduating, they're successfully taking the bar exam, and they're starting with us in the fall. So it's been a positive process. I mean, although the biggest drawback obviously is that it just takes that much time to get those individuals onboarded. So
That makes sense. I mean, obviously we don't want to derail that process, but we want to try to find ways to eliminate positions that are vacant for long periods of time, and there's no intention to fill them. So perhaps something like this would work.
And if it's helpful for you to see, in our written testimony, we did provide a list of like the number of positions that we currently have committed for those attorney positions and the different places that they're coming from. I mean, the interesting thing that you'll see from that is we are drawing a lot of new attorneys in from out of state now as well, which is helpful for the attorney shortage in Kansas as well. So we definitely want to make sure that we're maintaining those good relationships with the law schools and not having to rescind offers that we've already made.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any other questions?
Madam Chair, this is Senator Alley.
Yes, Senator Alley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In with the one we were just speaking about, I think if we have a committed position and then someone that has then accepted that position, that should not be, that's not who we're talking about here. We're talking about ones that they basically have continued to have no commitment to fill that position. So these are few positions. I think they said they had 13 at one time. So I don't think this is what we're talking about. I think we're talking about other types that are not committed. So these are committed and have been accepted by the student.
Okay, any other questions?
Madam Chair, Cindy, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing the last name. It's Holscher has her hand raised.
Yes, Senator Holscher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Actually, most of my question got addressed already. However, I missed, Heather, I think you said that we are already short over 600 attorneys. I didn't quite catch that number.
Thank you, Senator. Our workloads report that we did based on the National Public Defender workload recommendations, we published our report on that last December of 2023, actually. Basically, our calculation was that we were short for our current caseloads 667 full-time employee positions, but those include attorney, legal assistants, investigators, mitigation specialists, our administrative assistants in our public defender offices across the state. So that's not all attorney positions, and that's based on current caseloads. Obviously, the more cases that continue to get filed in criminal cases across the state, the farther afield, the farther that number gets from where we're at currently. Currently, we have 289 FTEs.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Madam Chairman,
Yes,
Senator Billinger.
Senator Billinger.
Right. So, question for the opponent. Can you tell us how many outside attorneys you're using at this time?
Yes, Senator. We have over 300 outside attorneys that we are using. Their private counsel that we have to pay $120 an hour for right now to accept cases, because we either have areas that are not covered by one of our public defender's offices, and so they're entirely reliant upon private counsel who agree to take our appointed cases, or in areas where we have public defender's offices, but we're insufficiently staffed and therefore end up having to offload cases to our assigned counsel panel because we don't have enough staffing to be able to handle those in-house. And so now I will tell you, all those number of attorneys are not full-time equivalent to attorneys. They're not taking just bids cases full-time. They're oftentimes private practitioners that are taking some bids cases plus some retained cases plus, maybe appointment cases from other panels like our misdemeanor or juvenile panels from the counties or federal appointments or something like that. So that while 300 sounds like a lot, that's for the entire state, and they're not fully taking just bids appointments. Does that answer your question, Senator?
Yes, and can you give us a cost factor for those?
Yeah, so right now, we pay $120 an hour for those, and our assigned counsel program costs us right now around $29 to $30 million a year for those costs. One of the problems that we're having is those costs continue to go up because we're having to control our caseloads in our public defender's offices for ethical reasons, because there's ethical limits on how many cases you can take. And as a result of that, we've had to offload more and more cases into our assigned counsel panels. The other thing is because we have such shortages of assigned counsel panels, or assigned counsel attorneys across the state, we're having to increasingly ask people to drive pretty far distances in order to cover cases. And then that involves additional windshield time, additional mileage, additional things like hotel costs if they have, a jury trial that's going to last several days and they, live 5 or 6 hours away from the place they're taking the case in. And so where it's not viable for them to go back home again every night, kind of thing in between. So those costs continue to rise as we're as a result of both the attorney shortages and as a result of the insufficient staffing we have in our public defender offices.
So how much an hour more are we paying for outside counsel?
So if you hold the assigned counsel to the same ethical standards as our public defender's offices with the same, number of hours that they're ethically required to meet the minimum standards of reasonably effective assistance of counsel, then it ends up being the difference between about $83, $84 per hour for our actual public defenders compared to $120 for our assigned counsel. When you, like I said, when you hold them to the same ethical requirements.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I do have a couple of questions for you, Heather. So what this bill, I think we're hearing two different problems. What this bill does is say if you have a funded FTE open for 180 days or more, could you not still have those committed unfunded FTEs open for those law students?
I think the problem is as to when we would actually get that funding. I think that's the concern. What we're talking about here is a lot of times these are positions that had attorneys in them. We've had turnover because a lot of times our attorneys, once they get several years of experience under their belt, they can go elsewhere for higher pay than what we pay them. And so we have these positions that are already in our budget that are funded. And then it just takes us a while to be able to replace them. So my concern would be, unfunding those positions would make it very difficult for us to make sure that when we did actually make those commitments, that we would have that funding back in place in time to be able to meet that need. And because these are not necessarily new positions that are starting new, I mean, they're positions that were already in existence, but we've just had turnover. So, and we do try to make, obviously, when we don't want to hold those positions open, but when we do have that cost savings, from that period of time, we do try to make sure that we're making good use of that with our things like, for instance, this last year when we knew we were going to be short funds for our assigned counsel program as part of our caseload consensus meeting with KLRD and Division of Budget, we did agree to use some of our funding to be able to pay for the $1.7 million that we were going to be short in that. We would not have had that funding to do that, obviously. So we would have had to ask for a supplemental request if we hadn't had that there. Now, that's not to say that I want to be able to have that money there for that purpose. We want to be able to have those positions filled, but certainly when we do have some of those cost savings, we do try to make sure that we're using it for our, case purposes, as opposed to, having to come back and ask for additional funds otherwise. So it's not ideal. I would prefer to have all of our obviously all of our budget funded appropriately for our needs. But sometimes, especially when you're talking about like litigation costs from year to year, whether it's in like our capital program or whether it's in our assigned counsel program, those are oftentimes wax and wane, and depending on how cases move. And so sometimes some of that is difficult to predict. So I would prefer to be able to have people in those positions. And I'm not sure how to unfund them temporarily, essentially, without then being concerned about whether or not we'd have that funding back in place in time to be able to actually fulfill that commitment that we've made.
Can you hear me?
Because it's already.
Can you hear me, committee? Heather, I understand. I'm trying to get to what this bill deals with. And I understand that the crux of this bill is we have funded FTE positions. No one is saying you can't have a committed position, but we're paying for an employee that doesn't exist. And from your testimony, you're saying, yep, and we're using that money for a salary that doesn't exist for other purposes. And I just want the committee to understand that's what this bill deals with. It does not deal with taking away an FTE that you have for a committed attorney. It's saying we're not going to fund that because we're funding work by an individual that isn't being done. And so that's what this bill deals with. This bill doesn't do anything to harm, does it? The shortage of attorneys. Passing this bill does not harm that. That problem is going to exist. This bill is dealing with funding for positions that are empty and vacant for over 6 months. And I would suggest that if an agency needs money for another expense, that needs to be accurately reflected in a budget, not using funded FTEs that aren't there for those purposes. And I think that's what this bill is addressing. Is that not accurate?
Madam Chair,
Yes.
Senator Alley, according to testimony, it said Senate Bill 99 will eliminate the positions that have already been offered and accepted. If we just had an amendment that said, if you have offered a position and accepted that position, then those students are not included in that number. We're talking only about 13 students here that are in that position today. So I think if we would just maybe change the wording a little bit to say that if you've offered a position and accepted a position and they haven't passed like the bar so they can go to work, until they pass that bar, those positions are not included in those that are FTEs, but they're not hired.
Again, and I'll ask for the revisor to clarify, we're not cutting those FTEs. That position will be there, but until they start doing the work of that position, that's when the funding should kick in. Is that not correct, Mr. Weiss?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, the funding would be lapsed for those positions for July 1, 2025. So then if there were they needed additional positions, then they would have to then come back to the legislature and then ask for that with the funding for those.
But they can have as many FTEs as they have attorneys coming in, we're just not funding them till they begin the work. So I don't know that this bill is cutting those. It's just saying we're not going to fund those. Is that correct, Mr. Weiss?
Madam Chair, yeah, the bill would say that they would have to the agency head would certify, here's how many positions we haven't had filled for 180 days or more. Those positions would then be abolished along with the lapse of the funding for those positions. So then those positions would need to be, they'd have to go back and ask for those positions and that funding through the budget process. Then
So the solution may be that they can have the FTE, but not the funding until those positions are filled for those that are committed. That to me would solve the problem. If we clarified, you can have the FTE, but not the funding until that position is filled. Would that meet the need? Okay, I see someone's hand is raised. Oh, yes, Miss Essie.
Sorry. This is
Yes.
Heather's. I
Yes.
wasn't sure if you were asking me or the reviser. I apologize. Is it okay
Yes,
for me to
yes, you
address your
absolutely,
question?
please.
I don't mean to interrupt. It's hard on WebEx, I know. So the problem that we would have is that if we don't have the funding associated with the FTE, then we can't make a promise to that attorney that we're actually going to be able to follow through on that commitment, because the process of going through the budget process, to be completely honest, we frequently ask for things as part of that budget process that we frequently do not get. And as a result of that, it is not really, it puts us in a really tough position to make an offer to an attorney if not knowing, or a potential attorney not knowing for sure if we're going to actually have that funding and if it's going to come through, because the way the budget process works and the timing of our hiring process is that we're making that commitment in around the same time, essentially, that we're submitting our budget for the following year. And so we're not going to find out until the end of March or April of the following year, whether or not we're actually going to have the funding, or whether or not the legislature is going to allocate the funding for those positions that we've requested. So that's part of the difficulty that we have, is that our hiring process, because of the way that starts so early, doesn't match with the budget process of when we'd actually know whether or not we have the funding to be able to really commit to that position. So that's part of our concern, is that if we lose that funding, like we really can't make that commitment until we know we have that funding. Does that kind of answer your question? I'm sorry, I don't mean to.
Madam Chair, Adam Thomas here. I have a question. Oh, can you hear me, Madam Chair?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, Senator Thomas.
My question is, so to that point, how much is offered to these attorneys on the front end when you guarantee them a job a year later? How much does it cost you for those offers or upfront costs?
So our starting salary right now for attorney positions is $62,500. We've asked for the last couple of years to continue trying to raise those starting salaries, but that's where we're at right now.
Okay, but do you pay that? So when you make an offer to a student who's got 1 year left of school, do you pay them a salary for that year while they're in school?
No, we don't end up actually paying that money out until they start. So sometimes, like I said, if they get their temporary license to practice early, they can always start over the summer, or otherwise they're starting around the time that they take the bar exam, or after they get their results.
Okay.
So there is a period of time where, because of the process, that position is funded. But like I said, if we don't know until the following March that whether or not we're actually going to have the funding for that new FTE, then we can't make that commitment to them the prior September. And if we wait until March or April to make that commitment, we've lost out on potential positions, because those graduating law students are all graduating with offers already by that point. So it puts us in a, like, I 100% can understand the concern about allowing a position to be funded for a period of time when it's not filled. And like I said, that is not ideal, but the process that we're in makes it really difficult, if not impossible, for us to wait for, that time frame when we actually know whether or not we have that budget and that FTE position later in the spring. It just doesn't line up with the reality of the actual hiring process.
Sure. And Madam
So
Chair, if I may ask one more question with your permission.
Certainly.
Okay. Other agencies, schools, KSD, all these other agencies have sort of an unencumbered funds balance or something in the bank to where if they have to come back for reimbursement to the legislature, they can. So, and I don't mean this question to sound disrespectful, but is there nothing in the bank at the agency that would say, out of uncertainty, if the funds aren't available this year, we make an offer in the first few months, like you talk about March, they start in March, we pass the budget, it goes into effect in July. You're talking April, May, June, 3 months worth of salaries for however many students you contract that would have to come out of pocket, that if you get those FTEs, you would then be reimbursed for those funds. So is that not possible?
I mean, traditionally our agency has been underfunded enough that that there are some years where that would be really difficult. I mean, the last couple of years we have had some additional funds that we could cover that time frame. It's more about the inability to actually even make that commitment if we don't know that we're going to have those FTEs early. And if those FTEs are not funded, we can't tell a law student that we're going to have that position if we don't, back in September, if we don't know that we're actually going to have it. And so that's the difficulty. It's even if they're starting early, that's less of the problem. It's about the actual ability to make the commitment if we don't know that we're going to have a funded FTE.
Very good. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Heather, so I guess my question would be to follow up on Senator Thomas. When you had all of this money coming in, these funds, and you weren't using it for a position, why wouldn't you have put that into, you said your salaries are very low. Why wouldn't you have been using that to increase salaries? Why wouldn't you have been using that to put back for the very thing that Senator Thomas is asking? In anticipation of funding these positions or increasing salary to be more competitive instead of spending it on other things.
So I can't, because they're one-time cost savings, because it's a position that we know is going to be filled in the next year. We can't utilize that to raise salaries in other places because we're not going to have the budget to fund those raises in future years if we're using those one-time cost savings. So part of what we do use that for is, if we do have somebody who is going to start early, obviously we use a portion of their salary to allow them to start early before the changeover in the fiscal year. We also have utilized some of that funds, one-time cost saving funds, in order to help pay for our paid internship program, which is one of the actual direct pipelines to our hiring. Most of the people that we're hiring in their third year of law school right now have been people who did our internship programs the year before when they were 2Ls in law school. So, we try to use that for the purposes of being able to get and retain those attorneys, but we can't use that funding for salaries, because when those positions do start and they do come in and they do start working, then all of a sudden that extra money isn't available anymore for whatever raises would have been that, whatever raises we would have used that for. So it's because it's that one-time cost savings that makes that not usable for that purpose.
Signing vote, couldn't you use it, in a creative way? And I think we've got the gist of the issue. I would challenge the committee that I do think that this is an issue. I don't know that how it's currently being addressed is the most accurate way to do it. So we do have, I do believe that Charles Dalton from the AG's office is on. So we are going to go ahead and let Mr. Dalton testify. Are you there?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee for the opportunity to provide testimony. My name is Charles Dalton, the Chief of Staff to Attorney General Kobach. While we appreciate the intention of this bill to reduce government inefficiencies and address budget concerns, we must respectfully oppose it due to the serious and unintended consequences that it would have on the Office of the Attorney General. If passed, this bill would severely limit our office's ability to fulfill our core responsibilities, potentially jeopardizing public safety, undermining the state's legal system, and leaving recent legislation without enforcement. Kansas is already grappling with a severe shortage of attorneys, as recently noted by Justice K.J. Wall, and the Office of the Attorney General is experiencing similar challenges. Nationally, we are facing a crisis of the availability of public defenders and prosecutors, and this bill would only exacerbate that problem. As a result, our ability to prosecute violent crimes, including murderers and sexual crimes against children, would be compromised, significantly impacting the public safety. Currently, the Office of the Attorney General faces a vacancy rate of 15%, with the majority of those vacancies in attorney positions that are essential for fulfilling our statutory obligations. If Senate Bill 99 were to become law, positions that have been vacant for 180 days would be eliminated on July 1st. However, the statutory duties of the Office of the Attorney General would remain unchanged, meaning we would be legally required to carry out these responsibilities, but without the resources or personnel to do so effectively. And to comply with those statutory obligations, we would, be forced to prioritize those obligations, which would mean that we would have to divert resources from other essential functions of our office, such as prosecuting child sex crimes or capital murder cases unattended. Although those duties are not statutorily mandated, we believe it's vital to Kansas and justice in Kansas, and it would be unconscionable for us to not be able to fulfill those duties to our greatest ability. Moreover, the elimination of these positions could lead to staff burnout. It would quickly become apparent that the remaining staff would be left to shoulder an ever-growing workload with no clear indication of when or if those workloads would ever be divided among a fully staffed office again. This would further complicate our ability to recruit and retain attorneys, ultimately crippling our capacity to protect consumers, prosecute crimes, and defend Kansas' constitutional rights and freedoms. To be clear, we understand the need to eliminate wasteful spending and streamline government operations. However, a blanket approach to abolishing vacant FTEs could inadvertently cripple the Office of the Attorney General's ability to serve Kansas effectively. A more strategic approach could preserve critical resources, especially attorney positions, which are essential to maintaining public safety and fulfilling our constitutional obligations. At the very least, we strongly urge this committee to exempt attorney positions from the scope of this bill to prevent the critical functions from being compromised. In closing, we urge this committee to reconsider the impact of Senate Bill 99 on the Office of the Attorney General. We are committed to working collaboratively with the committee and other stakeholders to identify and eliminate waste in government, but we firmly believe this bill, as currently presented, is not the right solution. Thank you for your time, and I will stand for questions when appropriate.
Thank you so much, and thank you for being patient while we work through all the technical issues. My question would be, how does not funding a worker who is not doing the work threaten or exacerbate the shortage of attorneys?
So I'll answer that question. One thing I want to build on top of that. So to put it in perspective, so our civil defense litigation team, before we took office, this was in like 2021, 2022, had somewhere neighborhood of 10 line attorneys. Now, those line attorneys are all classified the same. They're assistant attorney generals in the Civil Defense Department. If we were to hire 6 of those vacancies, of those 10 vacancies that we have in that unit today, the other 4 would be vacant for that 180 days and fall victim to being abolished and the funding abolished. The problem is that inhibits our ability to go out and hire those people because we don't have the resources to pay them. And it's unclear whether we will have them for the next fiscal year as we head into it. And I know, and I wholeheartedly agree that, agencies shouldn't be consuming SGF funds for positions that aren't being filled. And not only do we believe that, but we also participate that. We reported $800,000 in shrinkage, which is returning SGF to the state coffers because of vacant positions. So, I firmly believe in living and dying by the sword. We return the money that goes unspent on these vacancies, but knowing that we get the reappropriation the next fiscal year allows us to, in earnest, work to fill those vacancies.
So
Carol?
you return the money. Others do not. We've heard testimony that they spend it on other expenses. But what if you were able to keep those FTE? We didn't abolish the FTE, just the funding for not funding phantom workers. How does that would that inhibit your ability to recruit attorneys?
Especially with the attorney salaries, we've been raising our attorney salaries, especially in the more specialized litigation departments. It would be hard for me to go out and recruit and hire attorneys at $120,000 a year with a level of uncertainty that the funds aren't coming. The legislature has been very gracious with the 2 years that we've been in office, but it's I don't want to put the agency in a position where we hire people in July hoping that we get the funds in April in a change package. And to address Senator Thomas's question earlier, if the funds don't come in a change package, we cannot reimburse the other, however many months of the fiscal year if those funds come in July. Once July comes, the books for the previous fiscal year are essentially closed. We do not have the ability to take the next fiscal year's funds and reimburse for the prior fiscal year.
Okay, Senator Alley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This seems to be an issue with our attorneys. We've heard from 2 conferees now, but it also is an issue in some of our state hospitals. But in some of our state hospitals, they have 900 FTEs, but only 450 full-time employees. What do they do with the money, the FTE money that is given to them? Do they give it back in shrinkage, or do they use it for another issue, another spending in their agency?
We might ask Dylan Deere. Dylan, do you have any insight into that?
Madam Chair, can everybody hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
So for those vacant positions, the majority of that goes to contract nurses.
But are there not those contract a different funding source? Contract employees are different funding source?
It is both the vacant position funding and some additional funding on top of that totally funds contract nurses at the hospitals.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions?
Yes, Madam Chair, I have a question.
Yes, I'm not sure who that is.
Patrick Schmidt.
Oh, yes, Senator Schmidt, I'm sorry, yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Question for the representative from the AG's office. How many full-time employee openings have you had since calendar year 23? And also what for 23, 24, and 25, what has been your spend on outside counsel?
So I don't have, I can give you the spend on outside counsel for fiscal year 24 was $2.8 million. And you're going to have to forgive me. I believe, and I can, Senator Schmidt and other members of the committee, we can send you the exact vacancies and FTE amounts from the, our 2 years in office. But I know, like I said, this year, I think we're in the neighborhood of 30 unfilled FTEs. In the previous fiscal year, we had, I want to say, around 27 to 28. Mind you, that also encapsulates the legislature giving us more duties such as age verification, which bear more FTEs and responsibilities. So although those numbers are consistent, they don't encapsulate the growing responsibilities of the AG's office or the increased FTE amounts.
Okay. Yeah, if it would be, I would appreciate having a detailed description since calendar year 23 for the responsibilities for those open positions, and also what the work product has been for those outside counsel. Thank you.
Senator Holscher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to go back to Dylan in regard to the information he provided a while ago, as far as unused FTE money going to contracted workers to try to have these positions addressed when we haven't been able to hire. Did you indicate that typically that's where the funds are going? And then it sounded like on top of that, maybe some departments are having to use additional funds because these outside contracted attorneys cost more money than what we would allot for an FTE. Did I get that correct?
Madam Chair, did you want me to respond to that
Yes,
question?
yes, Dylan.
Sorry. So it is really on a case-by-case basis, and it depends upon, the hospitals and our veterans' homes are dealing with issues with contract nurses. All right. And bids their assigned counsel caseloads tend to increase with their number of vacant positions. But you cannot completely, you could never completely eliminate assigned counsel because of conflicts of interest issues at the Board of Indigent Defense Services. And so it's really a case-by-case basis.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, committee, we thank you to the opponents. We do have written only opponent testimony that is included on your agenda. We do have neutral testimony today from Adam Prophet from the Department of Administration. Mr. Prophet, are you there?
Yes, I am, Madam Chair. Thank you very much. Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. As stated, my name is Adam Prophet. I am here today specifically as the Secretary of Administration to provide neutral testimony on this bill. Full transparency, there are 3 categories of testimony: proponent, opponent, and neutral. I think ours would qualify as kind of a word of caution. So it's going to sound more in the neutral phase, but it's really intended to detail some of the unintended consequences that might not have been contemplated when the bill was written. And many of those themes have already been touched on. So I'll try to gloss over those as best as I can and provide some of the other issues that we're seeing here or concerns. I'll also note that I am testifying on behalf of the entirety of the cabinet agencies across the administration. Here at DFA, we occupy sort of a unique space where we get the holistic view of personnel through our central Office of Personnel Services. We can kind of see into each of the agencies. So rather than having a host of agencies come before we thought it would be more efficient to have just one. So the reality is, if this bill is enacted, it would impact different agencies differently, right? So for any agency that has very few or no positions funded with SGF dollars, there's going to be very few to no impact to those agencies. For those agencies that might have a more balanced split between funding sources, the impact is going to vary just kind of depending on how that agency is operating and the nature of the positions that are funded through SGF. And then for the agencies that have a majority of their positions funded with SGF dollars, think state hospitals or corrections or the like, the impact could be pretty considerable. So depending on where you fall in that range, the impact is going to vary for your agency. So to provide a couple of examples, and these are in my testimony, but I wanted to highlight them. Department of Administration, so my agency, as we look through the numbers and did the analysis over the past couple of days, we've identified that we currently have one position that would be on track at the end of June to fall victim to this or to be abolished. Obviously, we believe in that position. We're going to do what we can to find a qualified candidate to fill that, to complete the duties, but we have one position that is on track. If we look at KBI, for example, they currently have 25 positions that would fall under this, the abolishment at June 30th. They've been open for longer than 180 days and funded. However, similar to what one of the previous conferees was discussing with a committed individual or committed individuals, they do have several that are committed. But with the KBI and specifically with special agents, the process to get through all the background checks and polygraphs and all the medical reviews and everything that's required to become a special agent or even an employee of the KBI, that process can take upwards of 9 months. So you already have a process built in whereby you're exceeding the 180-day threshold that's identified in this bill. So they anticipate that many of these 25 will be filled by June 30th, so they wouldn't be abolished. But for other positions that they're still working through the process, they could negate months of effort if they were to be abolished at the end of the fiscal year. On the more extreme end of the spectrum, if you look at Department of Children and Families, or DCF, they have identified that they have 199 positions which are at least partially funded with SGF that have been open for more than 180 days. So strict reading of the bill, if the intent is to lapse all positions that are even partially funded with SGF, they're saying that they could lose upwards of all 199 of these positions, even though some of these positions are only funded about 3% with SGF funds. And to give a flavor of what these positions do, largely disability determination. They're doing work with the Social Security Administration, performing work that is required by them for disability determination. There are requirements on what they need to be able to get done. So, those are some examples that have numbers behind them. There are many agencies that have a multitude of positions that are funded either with federal funding and SGF split, or maybe funded by a grant and fee fund and federal and SGF. And so it's going to impact these agencies differently. The reality is if we go down this path and it works the way it's written and what we're hearing today, you could be in a position where you see very little SGF savings, quite honestly, but a large programmatic impact. So if I can give an example of one of my previous roles that I held when I was Medicaid director for the state, KDHE, some positions are 100% SGF funded, but when you get into Medicaid, a lot of those have a funding split. And you could walk down the hall, and depending on what the person did, they would have a different SGF versus federal split. So a medical professional might be a 75% federal, 25% SGF. Eligibility might be 90% federal, 10% SGF. General administrative might be 50-50. So if you come across an individual who is their salary is 90% funded by federal dollars and 10% by state, let's say their base salary is $50,000. But they're all-in costs, fringe benefits and the taxes and everything that the state pays. The cost of the state is $70,000 for that employee. Well, if they're a 90-10 employee, meaning 90% of their salary and wages is funded by the feds, the state is only covering $7,000. So if we eliminate that position, we're saving $7,000 of SGF, but we're losing somebody who contributes $70,000 worth of work to the program. And you start stacking those up, and you could have some consequences that might not have been contemplated. Some of the previous conferees have talked about difficult to fill positions. Attorneys are certainly in that realm. There are a host of other difficult to fill positions or positions that might take longer to fill for various reasons. Thinking about my other job, if you will, in the budget office, we had a situation a couple of years ago, let me start by saying we're fortunate that the majority of our staff has been on board for 15, 20, 25 years. So we don't have a whole lot of turn, and I hope to keep it that way. But several years ago, we had an employee who was near retirement, and she ended up retiring in November. Well, as we're heading into legislative session, it was not feasible to hire somebody and bring them on board during the legislative session because our work really showed a large uptick during the legislative session. So we made the decision to wait until after session and brought somebody in who was graduating from grad school that wasn't able to start until June. So we extended beyond the 180-day period based on the needs of the business at the time and our inability to get somebody on board. So sort of just another consideration. One of the, or a couple of the examples that have been provided is what the impact could be on contract costs. So you could find yourself in a situation where you're actually going backwards, right? It could be penny wise, pound foolish, for lack of better terms. So we would abolish some of these positions that have been open because they're hard to fill or for whatever the reason might be. But the work still needs to be completed. And so then we have to go out for outside resources, a contract to fulfill that. Generally speaking, the contracts that we pay are going to be in the neighborhood of 1.5 to 2.5 times the cost of what a state employee would be. So reference was made to the state hospitals, and Dialect did a really nice job of summarizing how that works, where we use funding for salary that would have otherwise gone to salaries to pay for part, but then we have to go above and beyond for contract costs. The state hospitals for next year, they're seeing a need of upwards of $43 million of SGF to hire a contract nursing staff just to be able to get through and maintain staffing ratios and care for those that are in our care and for our employees. So if we were able to fill all those positions, it would cost significantly less than $43 million. Now, it's going to be difficult to fill those positions. We're in that position for a reason, but that's just kind of an example of what the magnitude could be dependent on the agency that you're in. So I guess the bottom line is, I understand the intent behind this piece of legislation. I agree, as one of the previous conferees stated, that we need to be more mindful and focus on efficiencies and making sure that we're using money where it should be used. But as you've heard from some of the previous conferees and hopefully some of the examples I provided, there could be some pretty large unintended consequences or downstream impacts that haven't been contemplated that could sort of walk us backwards from where we are today. So, Madam Chair, if it's okay, this is not in my testimony, but if I could switch gears and take my Secretary of Administration hat off and put my Budget Director hat on and try to answer some of the questions. Is that all right, ma'am?
Yes, and we are out of time, but are there any final questions or questions for Mr. Profit? Okay, seeing none, I am so sorry we're out of time. I thought this was going to be the quickest hearing ever, and it turned into a long one. So I think there's a lot for the committee to look at and contemplate. Thank you to all of our conferees for being patient and being here on WebEx. And committee, we will meet tomorrow, hopefully. And with that, we are adjourned.